We often hear stories of memoirs and guides for caregivers, but today we have something a little different. Today we're exploring an inspiring journey of a caregiver who channeled her experience into something truly unique. What happens when the profound realities of caregiving spark the imagination to weave entirely new worlds? This summer, prepare to be captivated by a voice who transformed her caregiving journey into a stunning work of fiction. Get ready to meet another caregiver turned creator, unlike any we've had before, or for quite a while anyway, and discover her enchanting book, The Memory Weavers. You won't want to miss this, so stay tuned. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we are talking to Muffy Walker. She's another caregiver turned creator, but she's a creator with a little different twist. She wrote a fictional novel, and we are here to bring you a little summer reading and a little caregiving advice all wrapped up in one episode. So thanks for joining me, Muffy.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
You're welcome. So tell us about you. I know you took care of your mom, and that led you to writing this work of fiction, which is not generally where most of us caregivers go. So tell us about you, your mom, and give us all the details.
Sure. I have a master's in psychiatric nursing. I got that in 1983 from University of Pennsylvania, and shortly thereafter I went on to get my MBA. I was going to go into hospital administration, but decided to do marketing. Along the way there, my mother was diagnosed, so that was 23 years ago. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. She lived in Massachusetts. And it's an interesting story how we learned about that. None of her children lived in Massachusetts. We were spread out across the United States. And one day her best friend called to tell us that my mom had gone to a day concert in Massachusetts, but got lost coming home and ended up in New Hampshire and slept on the couch in a motel.
Oh, my.
The clerk didn't do anything to help. And then the next morning, when she could see her surroundings, she figured out how to get home and told her friend about it. So we decided at that point that we would bring my mother to California. And she lived with us for a while until she needed to go into assisted care. But while she was here, she was complaining about her illness and thinking that other people's illnesses were the lesser of the evils, and said she wanted to trade brains. So, so I thought, oh, well, there's a book idea. And I don't know where that came from, Jennifer. It just popped into my head that it was a book. So I started writing this book about a woman with with Alzheimer's and another character with bipolar disorder. And the reason for the character with bipolar disorder is I founded the International Bipolar Foundation 18 years ago. So I know that's a space that I know very well. So that's why I had that as my second character. But it really didn't go anywhere because the 2 illnesses don't really share much in common. And so I finally changed the story and have it with a woman gets the story, my book, Memory Weavers, is about a woman who gets her genome sequence, which I did so that I could experience it. And she finds out about that she has early onset Alzheimer's. And she meets a younger woman who was raped in college and has PTSD. So Hadley with the Alzheimer's is desperately clinging to her memories. And Rachel with the PTSD wants nothing more than to banish her memories. So the 2 women meet in a psychiatrist's office and they build a deep friendship and help each other out along the way.
That almost sounds like something that could actually happen.
Yeah,
It's interesting that was fiction. So did you write that while you were caring for your mom, or did that happen after she was gone?
So I
The book.
started writing it after she was gone. But about 95% of the memory loss examples in the book, in the fiction book, are directly from my personal playbook of taking care of my mother. And now my mother-in-law has Alzheimer's.
Dear Lord.
She's in hospice care right now with her Alzheimer's. And she did live with us for a while until she needed to go into a facility. So I've traveled that road twice now with my mother and my mother-in-law. So I have a great deal, well, I wouldn't say a great deal, but I have a lot of personal experience being the caregiver. And plus I'm a nurse. So
Just a little bit to cope with. It's not fun. I've talked to people that have had multiple family members with Alzheimer's, and I just can't imagine. It'd be like running one marathon after another. It's like, no, thank you. I mean, my mom and my grandmother overlapped. So my grandmother had vascular dementia, but the nature of everybody's relationship, I joke because I've learned a lot about best caregiving practices since my mom passed away. She's passed away at the start of the pandemic, so I got to miss all of that craziness. Um, My parents were terrible caregivers. My dad was terrible with my mom. My mom was terrible with her mom. And whenever I'm feeling guilt over, I wish I had known this bit of information when my mom was still alive, or um, I recently recorded an episode on finding the joy in dementia and all of the things she was doing with her dad. I was like, dang, man, I really stunk at this. I'm like, still better than my parents. So, I did not have a very good example. I think because they overlapped, I know there was a conversation. My mom is the oldest of four siblings, so I know that there was a conversation with the siblings and the spouses about what to do with my grandmother, their mom. I don't know I don't know, I don't have details of the conversation. I know my dad didn't offer much because he was more concerned about my mom, which is fair to a point, but what ended up happening was not right. My aunt ended up taking care of her mom full time, and they lived on my grandmother's social security, which was great until my grandmother died. And
wow.
I'm like, excuse me, that's not how my family does things. I don't understand. Like, you couldn't see that my aunt would end up at welfare and in subsidized senior housing. And my aunt has her own mental health struggles and, her own medical struggles. So it's like, okay, guy, it's crazy, but it's not easy. It's like we all seem to have to learn this journey ourselves. So,
Definitely.
if somebody's reading, maybe they're at the beginning of their caregiving journey and they're reading Memory Weavers. Is there information they can glean on like how to help them take care of their loved one, or is it just purely? You said they developed a really good friendship, so I'm assuming there's some tidbits in there that somebody could pick up on.
Absolutely. I think one of my goals in writing this book was to be um I can't say fictionally proper, but everything that's in the book is scientifically sound. It has been endorsed by NIH directors, Craig Venter, who sequenced the human genome, Scott Small who's the director of Alzheimer's research at Columbia, and they've all said this is spot on. It's scientifically and neurologically correct information. So I am giving the reader information about Alzheimer's. I'm listing, I'm naming resources throughout it. I'm naming studies. I'm naming things that people can do to help their loved one who has Alzheimer's. In the back of the book, I have a resource section that you can go to if you have, a history of sexual abuse, or if you have Alzheimer's and you need a caregiver support group. So I really want to leave the reader with information. Um, as you well know, people with the early onset Alzheimer's, that's a heritable disease. And so her children in the book have a 50% chance of inheriting that gene, that early onset Alzheimer's gene. And they go through their own struggles with trying to decide if they're going to learn if they carry that mutant gene. So that's another important part of the book. Um, The one piece that I want readers to know about that, the book is based in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this is before we had this transformational research treatments and information and research findings that we have today. So I really want people to know that what was available 23, 25 years ago is not what we have today. We have so much more to offer today and so much closer to a cure. So people need to know that this book was, and of course I give time references in it, so you know that it was written in the early 2000s.
Which was interesting. That's about the time my mom started showing signs. It was like the late 90s. She started, we had a 1 hour photo lab, portrait studio, family business. And she would, at the end of her work week, she started taking orders, or like we had a real estate appraiser. This is going to crack people up. This was back in the day when the real estate appraisers got triple copies of the prints and glue sticked them into their report. Like you see, you laugh, like we all laugh. It's like that was just standard practice. Now it's like, oh geez, like you just drag the digital file. It's like it's just amazing how much has changed. But they needed the smaller size print, so it required changing the paper magazine and the machine. Nothing that was like a big deal, but it required a little bit of higher planning. Like, okay, I'm going to do these orders because they're due soon, and then stop and do like this one gal's order. And then, or my mom always gave her about 24 hours so that we could kind of slot it in where it was logical and easiest. But my mom started forgetting to write when she was coming back. And it got to the point where she'd literally just open the door and look. Is it done? And it was so embarrassing. But it was so easy to dismiss as, well, somebody came in, the phone rang, she needed to use the bathroom, all of the above. It didn't even happen every week. It just was so sporadic that, I think it would be highly unusual to be like, oh my gosh, this is a sign. Even though my grandmother had vascular dementia, I don't think jumping to the conclusion of a cognitive impairment was logical until it started happening more often. And then she forgot she we we also did a lot of photo restoration. So one day I found an order with just a ton of photos in it and no directions at all. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And she goes, I don't know. That's employees' handwriting. And I was like, ooh, they don't even have similar handwriting. A blind person would notice the difference. And I confronted her with my concerns, which I've now learned that was the absolute worst time to do it. And I did it in the not the best way, but I didn't know any better at the time. And she looked at me and she goes, well, I don't want to end up like my mother. Stomped and turned around and huffed into another part of the shop. I was like, great. Murder is illegal. I don't know what the hell you expect me to do. And the rest of the day was a little bit tense. And so that's kind of where we were at. And they finally retired, and I was relieved, but also worried for my mom. So it was just crazy times. So yeah, I remember those times pretty well because they retired in like April of '05.
I remember a time, Jennifer, when we knew my mother had Alzheimer's. She knew she had Alzheimer's, and I took her to North Carolina to visit her, one of her best friends. So I flew her there, and then I came back to San Diego. And then when she had finished her visit, the friend took her to the gate, put her on the plane, and I was waiting at the gate in San Diego. And all the passengers came off, the flight attendants came off, the pilots came off, and no mom. And there had been a stopover in Birmingham, and she had gotten off there. So I'm waiting for my mother to come off the plane, and she doesn't. And of course, you know, the attendants took me over to a phone and they called Birmingham. And fortunately, they said that it was pretty obvious that she was confused and, when she got off the plane. So they just kept her sitting there in a wheelchair at the desk until somebody called and
Oh dear.
and they put her on the next flight. But those kinds of things are pretty scary.
Well, that must have been a good, like, easily a 3 hour wait, right?
Oh, at least I
I
had,
mean, it's a
so
5 hour time
she
difference.
got off
Or
and then they
no,
had to load the plane and fly from Birmingham. And then anyway, yeah, it was probably scary for her, and it was definitely scary for me.
definitely shaved a few years off your life. I just had a conversation with a caregiver whose mom got off the airplane and went into one of the restaurants, and she's like, "Well, just come into the restaurant and get me." We can't do that. You're in the airport. No, I'm not. I'm in the restaurant. It took them multiple phone calls and multiple coercions. They did not know what was going on. They knew something was up, but they didn't know what it was. Because I kept thinking, I don't know why you didn't call like the gate agent or security or like they're outside security where we have to wait for our loved ones. And mom is at the bar in the restaurant in the airport. It's like, holy crap. And they could see her suitcase going around and around on the baggage claim turntable until the turntable stopped and then the suitcase was just laying. I mean, that almost makes for some good comedy, except that it had to be so terrifying and so frustrating. And it's just, it's one of the reasons we need to seriously educate the general population on this is what's common. And, if you see somebody like this, please don't just assume they're drunk or stoned or whatever. Take a step back and think, well, maybe they got a medical issue and maybe I should pay attention or. But you probably never put your mom on an airplane by herself again.
No, I didn't. I didn't. I thought I had it all figured out. We'll take her to the gate, we'll meet her at the gate, but anyway, no, I didn't. But I'm also really pleased that we're pushing more for, a mini cognitive exam to be done during your regular doctor's appointment. I think that's really wonderful. I did a pickleball tournament just this past Tuesday for the longest day for the Alzheimer's Association. And I took one of the cognitive exams that anybody can do, draw the picture, do the clock, etc. And if this was just available to when you're sitting in a waiting room, if you're of a doctor's office, I think it would be wonderful.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to know they have Alzheimer's, but certainly if you can catch it in the earliest stages, we have a much better chance of prolonging one's life.
Well, we can thank the Alzheimer's Association for that. So if you are 65 and older, you should be receiving a mini cognitive exam. Ugh, that's a tongue twister. At your regular annual checkups. I'm not that old yet.
68 and I've never ever received one.
Go smack your doctor around. Because I don't want to say that it's required. Required is probably not the correct word, but it's supposed to be like the standard of care. I personally think they probably should start doing it sooner. So my mom was not formally diagnosed until she was 69. It was October of 2011. Her birthday is in January. So she was about 69 and 3/4. By that point, she was seriously mid stages. So she likely had early onset Alzheimer's. I have recently learned from some other guests, one of which was a geriatrician. My mom was involved in a car accident in 1991 where she smacked her head so hard on the steering wheel that it damaged the nerve that comes through your cheekbone to the point where her face was numb. And her being 48, 49, she broke her ankle when a drunk driver turned in front of her and she T-boned him. And obviously she hit the brake so hard trying to avoid the accident that she broke her ankle. And that was obviously what the ER concerned themselves with. I never thought to ask if she had a CT scan or if they did anything about her brain. I would think that it would be smart if you hit your face hard enough to damage a nerve permanently, but maybe they didn't know that at the time. I don't know. But I asked the doctor that was dealing with the older patients kept talking about, we never know what's going to hit us. He kept using that term. We don't know what's going to hit us. And I was trying to insert the question or the statement. Well, I know what hit my mom. My mom hit a drunk driver that turned in front of her and had this issue. And because that was December of 91, my daughter was a month old. And my mom started having these memory issues in mid 96. So 5 years later, 4.5 years later. And he said, oh, definitely it could have triggered the early onset of the disease. And had she known about the lifestyle choices that she should have made, it might have not happened as soon as it did.
Mhm.
So I haven't talked about this for a long time. My dad was a terrible eater. He liked fried hamburger patties, mashed potatoes, and peas or corn. Would have been thrilled with that for dinner every day for the rest of his life. I don't know how I managed to be raised by that man because I want variety. I want Mexican, Italian, Asian, American. Like I want all the flavors every week. And I'm not happy if I don't do that. If I don't cook that way, I get really bored and then I wish there was a pill to make me feel full because it's like I'm hungry, but nothing sounds good. Those are mutually exclusive. So my parents ate Wonder Bread. My mom drank 2 liters of Diet Coke a day. Um, a lot of processed American cheese, bologna. I don't need any of that stuff. It's like
Well, I think it was the diet of that age, the vegetables were all frozen and um
frozen vegetables are good for you. And you can actually I do a lot with frozen vegetables because it absolutely galls me how expensive fresh fruit and veggies are. And I'm not even talking about organic. It's like $45 for, a week's worth of berries. Just it rubs my little frugal self really wrong way. And I'm the one eating the berries, so it's the problem. I'm like having a debate with myself. Should I just skip them? No, I will not like it if I skip the berries, and they're good for my brain. But yeah, well, my dad just he was a terrible eater from birth. My grandmother tried to force feed him things, and that never turned out well for her. Let's just say we won't go too graphic. My dad had some good rebuttals, shall we
ugh,
say? But yeah, no, there she also managed to maintain her weight without exercise. So she didn't exercise. She didn't have a lot of, she got married at just past her 19th birthday. So she didn't have a lot of formal education past high school. So like she did all the wrong things, but they didn't know back then.
right. They didn't.
So do you have like a story about your mom that is reflected in the book that you could share with us?
Well, so many of them are. So the airplane story, the motel in New Hampshire is reflected in the book. So many of as I said, about 95% of the memory lapse issues in the book are directly from my playbook with my mom or my mother-in-law. So my mother was a very, very smart woman, summa cum laude grad from Bryn Mawr College. And so she could fake people out. I could take her somewhere with me, say I took her to my book club. And I would say, Mom, you remember Betty? And she'd be like, Yeah, Betty, it's been a while. And she doesn't have any idea who Betty is, or if I said to her, just kind of quizzing her, like, Oh, Mom, what'd you have for dinner last night? Just right away, she'd be like, Oh, I had salmon. She didn't have salmon. So she was able to fake people out for a while, and I think she faked her children out for a while because we weren't living there with her. And when she would call and give you an update about something, if it was something you already heard, I'd think to myself, "Oh, she probably thinks she told my sister this, but she's already told me." Until that motel incident occurred, and then we knew there was more going on than we were aware.
It's not uncommon for people with Alzheimer's to, I think they call it showcasing, where they act really good for strangers and then they're just all levels of terrible for you. It's like when our kids are toddlers and they're little angels for the preschool teacher and little monsters for us. That's
Yes.
not, and the one thing I've learned doing this show, the more intelligence somebody has, the more reserves they have, like the more tools they have in their brain to like cope with the drastic, devastating changes. So people with like really high IQs, like maybe you're a doctor or a lawyer or something, and you're always using your mind, you seem fine, and then all of a sudden, wham, it seems like you're in the middle of the disease all at once. It's
Hmm.
because they've had all these coping mechanisms until they run out of them, and then the curtain is pulled away and everybody's like, oh my God, you have a problem. I
Right.
think that's probably worse than my mom, she wasn't dumb, but she wasn't magna cum laude because she didn't go to college. So
Uh-huh. Yeah. My mom had the sundowner syndrome, where she would get angry and more confused and agitated. And that was always very difficult because, y- you know, it's upsetting to be
Hmm.
treated that way. And I had young children and she didn't understand when they would do something. And then you don't want to punish your mom because she can't help that she has sundowners, but yet she's being mean to your children. And so those are things are all this burden that the caregivers are carrying.
Did you ever find some solutions to the sundowning and the I guess she must have been scolding the kids for being kids.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I have friends whose mothers or fathers were put on medication for the sundowners. Like back then, it was Haldol. And my mother never needed anything like that. Just talk to her, calm her down, and then she would be okay. But I do know many people that have very, very, very bad sundowners and become aggressive with their spouse. And then the wife is fearful of the husband because he's a big, stronger man. And I have I have a friend right now whose husband needed to go into memory care, but she felt so guilty. She didn't want to do it. And he kept saying, if you do, I'm going to be so mad at you. And then in a kind of a silver lining way, she was in a car accident, broke her sternum and couldn't care for him anymore. So she had to put him in memory care, which is really where he needed to be. He needed to get, expert care and she needed to feel safe.
Did your mom's sundowning happen towards the end of the day when the light was changing and she was probably getting tired and hungry and maybe
Yeah.
overstimulated?
Yes, I think so.
Because I know some people whose loved ones seem to have sundowning not at sundown and it confuses them. So I try to point out that it's not always the change of light. The one time that I really experienced that with my mom, my dad ended up in the hospital for 32 days. So he was diabetic. He'd had a kidney transplant in 2009. This was the end of 2016 into 2017. And the donated kidney was also failing, which
Mm,
kills me. Was very strange because the gal that donated the kidney to him was at his funeral. I'm like, that must feel weird. Like
mm.
that's a very strange situation in my world. She was a major in the Salvation Army, so I'm not religious. She obviously was, so maybe she had a different perspective, but I just thought that was kind of odd. And we were driving from my house to her house down the back country roads, which were windy, and it was getting so it was December, so it was that's when it gets dark at like 4:30. And as we're driving, it's getting darker and darker, and there's not a lot of street lights out there. And she starts making these like really strange comments. Like one of them was like, she asked me if I really liked my house. And I said, yeah, why? And she goes, well, maybe you should pay your grandparents for it. Okay, what a huh? The house was built in 2007. Neither one of my grandmother was still alive when the house was built, but my grandfather, I'm like, it had nothing to do with this. It was so confusing. And I'm driving. My mom was good at springing that crap on me while I was driving. So, it's like try to do two things at once mentally. And that's the only time I ever experienced that sundowning when the light changed. But other times it was just like if I visited in the afternoon and stayed for a couple of hours, sometimes by the time they started getting the residents ready for dinner, she was getting kind of cranky with me. And I think it's because I think it was kind of her way of being like, I'm done with you. Feel free to go home now. I'm tired. Go ahead.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Have you, as a nurse, so you said you're a psychiatric nurse? Do you have any like formal training that helps explain sundowning or how to deal with that?
No, I didn't work in that space in psych. I worked mostly with abuse victims.
Mm,
And so I worked with a lot of PTSD and abuse victims, which is where the expertise for my other protagonist comes in the book. But I only what I read and minimally experienced with my mom about sundowners.
yeah.
But I do have examples in the book. There's the housekeeper of the woman who has Alzheimer's. She becomes frightened of the woman, and And then all of a sudden the woman just switches and she's like, oh, and I think we see that. We see that where they become angry and you know, strike out, and then the next minute everything's peachy and copacetic, right?
Yeah, and you're over there going, "Can I get off this roller coaster, please?" Like that's so emotionally draining because you're like, you're ready for that fight, literally, and then they're done with it, and you're like, "Well, now I have to be done with it, but I still ready for the fight."
Yeah, there's in the book I have I I'll tell people in advance that if it's a trigger for you, because I do have discussion about suicide. The woman with early onset is would like to discuss with her husband um assisted suicide because she doesn't want to wait until the end. And there's a point where she's talking to him about it, and he's like, no, I don't think I can do that. And he goes into his study and he gets, he takes a glass of bourbon and he does a shot of bourbon and he goes back out into the kitchen. And she's like completely forgotten that she talked to him about this assisted suicide. And he starts saying to her, her name's Hadley, says, Hadley, I don't think I could do this. And plus it's illegal. And then what if I got caught? What would happen to the children? And she's like, what are you talking about?
Oh my goodness, talk about roller coaster. That would be difficult. And my mom never talked about that. So I have a past episode that I'll link in the show notes where it's one of the only other caregiver turned creator. She wrote a book called House on Fire. And it starts, she was the character is an ER nurse. The caregiver is a nurse, but I don't think she was an ER nurse. And visiting on Christmas Day, and mom quasi mumbles under her breath that I can't really do this anymore. I think it's time to take care of it or do something. There was like some ominous verbiage, and basically, mom was asking the nurse daughter to offer to, and it's a wild story. So definitely read The Memory Weavers and then House on Fire. I actually listened to that one as an audiobook, and I basically listened to it while I was cleaning the house one weekend. I was like, well, let me keep finding other chores to do because this is like, I can't stop here. It's like riveting. So it was,
My book is available both in hard copy, paperback, Audible, and Kindle. So hopefully there's a format for everyone.
pick your poison. I like digital or audio. That way it's always with me. And if you get stuck somewhere, or I might drive a couple hours once a month to go home to get my haircut, see the chiropractor, visit my kid. So audiobooks are great because, you have 4 hours of driving, and I either got to stack up the podcasts to listen to, or, an audiobook's easier because it just goes. But, it's like I've learned how to tell the podcast players to play next and then add to queue, add to queue, add to queue. That way I'm not driving down the freeway going, which one is about the right amount of time left? Because that's not safe. And I don't want to cause any accidents because I got enough challenges in my life. So comparing your mom and your mother-in-law's Alzheimer's, did it present really differently?
Yes. So my mother was in her late 70s when she first or mid, I should say probably her mid 70s when she first started exhibiting. And she lived about 7 years after her diagnosis, which is, I think that's kind of the norm. Is that right, Jennifer? 5 to 7 years.
I think it's 8 to 10.
Oh, is it 8 to 10 now?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
my mom started showing signs in 96 and died in 2020. Well,
Wow.
you guys, yeah. My mom was on the longer end. I
Yeah.
don't know what's worse, when it's really quick that you barely have a chance to catch your breath and adapt to the new person because they're like new every week, or this long journey that you don't think is ever going to end, and then it ends and you're like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, we were told at the time of her diagnosis, she had about 5 to 7 years. And she lived about 7 more years. And fortunately, I'll say fortunately, at the end, it went very quickly. Very sad, but it went very quickly, and she didn't have to suffer anymore. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, is 93,
Oh, wow.
and she only started exhibiting signs of dementia probably 6 years ago. So she was in her late 80s when she started exhibiting signs, and she was already in a nursing home because of her age.
Mm.
So, so her, even though the memory issues were clear when she was living with us, we had to move to Switzerland for a while, and we took her with us. So she was living with us, and we could see some of these memory issues, but she wasn't officially diagnosed until her late 80s. And so I think hers is more, what I see with hers is more where she just repeats the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and asks my husband if he's married and if he ever had children, and asks, if our sons are married, and then he answers, and then she says, is Hunter married? And then he answers, and then she says, is Hunter married?
Oh, Lord.
um,
Those days.
whereas my mother's was more of day-to-day things. We're just constantly, what happened to this, and who's that, and where'd this go, and I don't know where I am, and what season are we in, and so yeah, a little different course, I would say.
It's definitely different. I have talked to a lot of people who taking care of a parent, very few of them started the journey when their parent was in their 80s, which is interesting because that's when the typical diagnosis of Alzheimer's is common, I guess is the right word. Like I said, my mom was 69, almost 70, and by that point it was like, duh, tell me something I don't know. And we were already learning how to cope with it. And let's see if it was 2011. I'm trying to remember when my dad took her car. Her nail salon was like a mile away from their house. And so it was like on the edge of the neighborhood on the main street. And it had gotten purchased by a new owner, and they did some like redecorating, so like different drapes, different doodads hanging in the windows. And she drove there just fine, got there. It didn't look familiar, which caused confusion. And then she was confused and struggled to get home, which again was like really a straight shot up the road. And at that point, my dad was like, we're done. And because that wasn't the first incident, but that was probably the worst because it was so close to home and they'd lived there forever and ever. And he gave the car to my brother-in-law. And my mom remembered that for a very long time. She'd be like, I don't know why he did that. She's always irritated at my dad. My poor dad is dead and she's still annoyed with, which was hard. She thought I was her best friend. And she would say, does my husband know what we're doing, where we're going, that you're here, whatever. And it was always in that tone of voice, always that sneering. "Eh." And at first, I would be like, yes, mom, dad knows where we're going. And one day I picked her up from the memory residence, and she asked me that when I got to her room, which was on the opposite side of the building from the parking lot. And we get about halfway down the hallway. Does my husband know where we're going? Yes, mom, dad knows where we're at. We get to the door that goes into the lobby. So the lock, the keypad door. She asks again. I give her the same wrong answer. I get her in the car, and she's asked me this like 5 or 6 times. I'm like, I don't think I can do this. I think I'm going to kill her. I might have to stuff her in the trunk, but I could probably still hear her. And I walk around the back of the car and hit the door handle to get in. And it was like a bolt of lightning went through me. And I was like, I am not answering her question. So should I get in? She goes, my husband know where we're going? Yes. I saw him at the lunch meeting. I told him I was taking to the nail salon. He gave me money. It's all good. Didn't ask me that question again. I was like,
Wow.
God. So it was like the weirdest thing because it took me a while to figure out that I couldn't respond in the normal way. I had to respond as her friend. It
Right.
was really strange. And one day we were driving and she was like, yeah, it was really sad when your dad got sick and died. And I was like, oh, thank God we're at a stoplight because that's startling. No, good thing I'm not driving, lady, because dear Lord, you just threw that one out of the blue. And I was like, yeah, he'd had diabetes a long time and he didn't like dialysis and da 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 da. And she said something else. And then she went, the sky is so pretty today. That was the only time we ever talked about my dad in 3 years.
Wow.
literally 2 minutes or less.
Wow.
It was, and you have to kind of wonder, like, all this time you've told everybody, I'm her best friend. I've known her forever, which always made people laugh because obviously my mother knew me the longest. So, that would make people chuckle. And then my mom would laugh, just kind of like the social graces kind of thing, like, oh, everybody's laughing. I better laugh too. And then for her to like just toss that one out was like, whoa, it was crazy. It's these journeys are wild.
Yeah, the personality changes are stunning.
Her personality didn't change a lot. It just, she was still kind of reserved, treated me like you would treat a friend. There was not, like people say, oh, we just sat there and held hands. Like that would never have flown with my mother. Um, there was not love yous. There wasn't a lot of hugs, which was hard, but that's how we were with friends. Like I'm not huggy with friends. I've gotten more huggy as my age advances. I was definitely like, I'm not a hugger. Now I don't care as much. But yeah, with my mom, there was always kind of that veneer of reserve, like we don't
Yeah.
go past here. There was one day she said, I love you, and I was so shocked. I'm not even sure if I responded. I think I did. But I remember I was walking away, I was leaving, and she was going to dinner, and she said, I love you. And I turned around. I hope she didn't realize how shocked I was because she probably did as far enough away and her visual processing was garbage. So
Hmm.
she might not even realize who she was talking to. Maybe she was telling somebody else that she loved them. I never thought of that before.
No, I'm sure she knew it was you.
I hope so. Well, we'll go with that. So how long did it take you to write the book? I asked because I've been mentally writing one for a year and I spend every Friday working on it because it's never going to go anywhere. Like I haven't found the plug to put into my brain to download the book.
I wrote it. It took me 13 years.
Oh, I'm not going to take that long, I hope.
Told me 13 that it would take 13 years. I don't think I would have started it. But as I said earlier, I started the book with two protagonists, one with Alzheimer's, one with bipolar, and I did that for about 3 years and it didn't go anywhere. And then I changed it to the woman with PTSD and it just in my brain it just took off and I had so much information in my head I couldn't type fast enough and I couldn't wait to get up the next morning and keep writing. And then I hired writing coaches. I had a writing coach in San Diego. And then after a while I thought, well, she can't read this book for the 900th time and give me, you know, good feedback. So
It's
then
a
I
fresh
hired
perspective.
yeah. Then I hired a writing coach in New York, and both of them were published authors. And so she helped me. Then I hired a content editor. Then I hired a line editor who literally went line by line by line in my book. And I sent it out, it was about 5 years ago. I sent it out to literary agents, and it didn't go anywhere. I got two literary agents who picked it up, but they wanted more conflict.
Mm.
And I was having a hard time because in my mind, the book, it was kind of about my mother, and I didn't want her to like turn into a drug addict or an alcoholic or something like that. So I was having a hard time with the conflict. And then I finally was able to add conflict. And if you read the book, this is not about my mother. um, and then then after I finished that, I went to publishers. I sidestepped the literary agents and I got picked up by two publishers, one in Los Angeles and one in Virginia. And there's a group called AIA that will read your contracts, your publisher contract for you. They're not lawyers, but they're published authors and they advise you. And the one said, don't go with the one in LA, go with the one in Virginia. They actually all advise that. So I went with Kohler Books out of Virginia. And interestingly enough, the day I signed, they said to me, okay, we want another book. Do you have any? And I said, yes, even though I didn't. So I thought I better start writing another book. So I started writing a book about a serial killer. And I have no law or police or any kind of experience in that area. So I was always asking. So I thought this isn't working. So then I decided to change the book to what I know, and I know about bipolar disorder because as a psychiatric nurse and founding the International Bipolar Foundation, I know that space really well. So that's what my next book will be about.
Is that one also fiction?
It is.
Nice. Well, that's awesome that they already wanted a second book before that had even crossed your mind.
They did.
That's funny. And why am I not surprised that the publisher in LA wasn't the right one? Being a multi-generational Californian, I don't know why I just jumped right there. How not cool of me. But I'll keep that in mind when I get mine done.
Exactly.
My biggest challenge, I started writing mine chronologically. So what I'm doing is my mom spent the last 3 years of her life in memory care. And we know a lot of people think, ooh, memory care bad. I have talked to more people who have utilized that option because it just becomes necessary. My dad died when I was 50. He died a month after my daughter moved out. I was like, there's no way in hell I'm moving my mother in. We would not have been good housemates if she didn't have Alzheimer's. And she had a poodle named Misty. I talk about her frequently. Anytime Misty would look at my mom would feed her. So Misty was literally double an average acceptable weight, which caused hygiene problems. We won't go any further on that one. And I had a golden retriever that loved me more than he loved himself. He did not like to be separated from me. If I left the house, he'd whine at the door. He was very pathetic in that respect. It's not like I worked from home. It's not like I was gone very often. It's like, dude, knock it off. He would literally sleep wrapped around my office chair. I could not get him to sleep next to the chair. No, he had to be touching me. 85-pound dog. He hated Misty so much. If he saw her coming in the door, he'd be out in the dog yard and he would lay there on the cement and just look unhappy until she left. So I'm like, there is no way I can do this to the household. I didn't think it was right for my mom. Um, I had moved the portrait business to my home. I had a studio attached to my house. Clients came and went. I'm like, I had a life. I'm like, this is not gonna work. Like there's too many negatives, too many cons. There's just no pros that I'm seeing here. Other than everybody thinks that's a good idea. I wasn't buying in. And so I ended up befriending a lot of the residents that my mom lived with, and they all had their own unique character, especially the one that was the resident klepto. I have more stories about her than there's probably space in the book. And then so I'm telling these residents stories and then explaining why. Why did this woman quote steal?
So yours is nonfiction?
Yes. So it's about my mom and the people she lived with and why they did the things they do. So I had to stop writing it chronologically because I got all confused. And I know how I want it to work, but I don't know. I'm working on it. So I have somebody local who's like, he's told my husband, oh, when she's done with her book, I want to read it. So I'm wondering if I get to a certain point, give it to him and see what he thinks. Because I'm getting to the point where it's like, oh, I have to almost like wait a week to see what I've written because it's not fresh anymore in my mind. And it's like, oh, wait, that doesn't quite make sense, or I need to add a little more details here. Whereas when you read it again, it's like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. So it's like, oh my gosh, what a chore. So I'm impressed that you're on book number 2. I have another past guest who's on book number 2. We were chatting about the process. So I will hopefully be another one. Well, I'm already a caregiver turned creator. That's what I like to call people like you, because I started the show after my dad died. So while I was caring for my mom, the show's gone on for 5 years post mom. So still learning good things. Still get to talk to really cool people like you. And as belated as it is, I'm going to start on the book either tonight or tomorrow. I was telling Muffy I'd finished my previous novel, didn't have enough time to read hers before today's recording. So
Well, I hope you like it.
I think I will. I had to remind myself what it was about because I don't generally buy the guests' books, especially because I have plenty of them. But I was like, oh, that's right. It's fiction. Cool. Now I remember why I was going to read it. So, because it's like, I already paid for it. Why was that going to? Oh, yes. Okay. Sounds really good. So I hope everybody, oops, pardon me, crashed into the mic. I hope everybody that's been listening downloads it, buys it, reads it, gets it out of the library, whatever, however you like your books. because when you read the description, it's pretty engaging and kind of draws you in already. So we
Thank
don't
you.
want to give no spoilers, but guess I better read it now so I can be ready for book 2.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so thank you so much for sharing about you and your book with the listeners. It's a good episode to come out in the summertime, give people, something else to read. And I like things that, I don't know if people watched the Netflix show A Man on the Inside. I have no caregivers that thought it was terrible, but I thought it was funny and humorous and kind of reflective of life. And so I like books that are like that as well. If I'm not reading, I like murder mysteries. So when you were telling me you were writing about a serial killer, I'm like, oh, there's a million plus podcasts on that.
Yeah.
You could probably get a lot of information just by listening to those, but you switch topics, so there's probably fewer podcasts on bipolar disorder. It's like, wait, I remember what it was.
Yep. Yep.
So, well, best of luck to you, and
Thanks,
thanks
Jennifer.
again for sharing.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Welcome.